Hello and welcome class 10 students. Today, we are going to dive deep into the fascinating world of our own bodies and the bodies of all living things by exploring the essential life processes that keep us going. We often take it for granted, but every second, our bodies are performing a massive maintenance job. In this session, we will look at how we define life, how organisms obtain and process food through nutrition, how they release energy from that food via respiration, the intricate systems used for transportation within the body, and finally, how we get rid of harmful wastes through excretion. Understanding these processes is essential because they're the tools our bodies use to maintain order against the constant threat of environmental breakdown. So, how do we actually know if something is alive? If we see a dog running, a cow chewing its cud, or a person shouting on the street, it's obvious. Even if they are fast asleep, we can see them breathing. But what about plants? We usually say they are alive because they are green, or because we see them growing over time. However, some plants have leaves that aren't green, and some animals breathe without any visible movement. Because of this, professional biologists look for something much deeper: invisible molecular movement. This movement is happening all the time inside cells and tissues, and it's considered the true hallmark of life. This brings up an interesting case with viruses. They don't show any molecular movement at all until they infect a living cell, which is why there's still a big controversy over whether they are truly alive or not. The reason this molecular movement is so vital is that living organisms are incredibly organized structures. We are made of organs, which are made of tissues, which are made of cells, and those cells contain even smaller organelles. The problem is that the environment around us is constantly trying to break down this order. If this organization breaks down, the organism simply cannot survive. Therefore, living creatures must be in a state of constant repair and maintenance. They use those invisible molecular movements to keep their structures functional, and these collective maintenance jobs are what we call life processes. These life processes never take a break. They are happening right now while you are sitting and watching this, and they even continue while you are asleep. Because this maintenance work is constant, it requires a steady supply of energy and raw materials from outside the body. Since life on Earth is carbon-based, most of our food sources are also made of carbon-based molecules. Depending on how complex these carbon sources are, different organisms have developed different ways to get their nutrition. Once inside, these food sources are broken down through chemical reactions, mostly oxidizing-reducing reactions, to create a uniform energy source that the body can use for growth and repair. This brings us to our first major process: nutrition. This is simply the transfer of an energy source from the outside to the inside of the body. Organisms handle this in two main ways. Autotrophs, like green plants and some bacteria, are the self-feeders. They take simple inorganic materials like carbon dioxide and water and turn them into complex food. Heterotrophs, like us and other animals or fungi, can't make their own food. We have to consume complex substances and then use special biological catalysts called enzymes to break them down into something our bodies can use. In the world of autotrophs, the superstar process is photosynthesis. This is how green plants take carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight and, with the help of chlorophyll, transform them into carbohydrates. These carbohydrates provide the energy the plant needs. If the plant makes more than it needs right away, it stores the extra as starch, which acts as an internal energy reserve. Interestingly, humans do something similar. When we have extra energy from the food we eat, our bodies store it as glycogen. Photosynthesis actually happens in a series of steps. First, the chlorophyll in the leaves absorbs light energy. Next, that light energy is converted into chemical energy, and water molecules are split into hydrogen and oxygen. Finally, carbon dioxide is reduced to form carbohydrates. It's important to know that these steps don't always happen one after the other. For example, desert plants take up carbon dioxide at night to save water and prepare an intermediate compound. Then, during the day when the sun is out, they use that light energy to finish the process. If you were to look at a cross-section of a leaf under a microscope, you would see tiny green dots called chloroplasts. These are the organelles that contain the chlorophyll needed for photosynthesis. You would also see tiny pores on the surface of the leaf called stomata. These pores are like doors that allow gas exchange. But since plants can lose a lot of water through these doors, they have guard cells that act as security. When water flows into the guard cells, they swell up and curve, which opens the pore. When the plant needs to conserve water, the guard cells shrink and the pore closes. While photosynthesis provides energy, plants need other raw materials for building their bodies. They absorb water from the soil through their roots, along with minerals like phosphorus, iron, and magnesium. One of the most important elements they need is nitrogen, which is essential for making proteins. Plants get nitrogen either as inorganic nitrates and nitrites from the soil or through organic compounds that have been prepared by specialized bacteria from atmospheric nitrogen. Now, let's look at the heterotrophs. Since they can't make their own food, they've developed various strategies to get it. Some, like fungi, think of bread molds, yeast, and mushrooms, actually break down their food outside their bodies and then just absorb the nutrients. Others take the food inside first and then break it down. This is what most animals do. There's also a parasitic strategy where organisms like cuscuta, ticks, lice, leeches, and tapeworms derive their nutrition directly from a host plant or animal without actually killing it. Even single-celled organisms have clever ways of eating. The amoeba, for example, uses temporary, finger-like extensions called pseudopodia to surround a food particle. It then pulls the food inside to form a food vacuole where it gets digested. The nutrients diffuse into the rest of the cell, and the waste is simply pushed out. Another single-celled organism, the paramecium, has a more fixed shape. It uses thousands of tiny hair-like structures called cilia that move in a coordinated way to sweep food toward a specific spot on its body for ingestion. In humans, the journey of food begins in the mouth, which is the start of a long tube called the alimentary canal. Our teeth first crush the food into smaller particles. As we chew, our salivary glands release saliva, which does two things. It wets the food to make it easier to swallow, and it introduces an enzyme called salivary amylase. This enzyme starts the chemical digestion right away by breaking down complex starch into simple sugars. Our tongue helps by moving the food around and mixing it thoroughly with the saliva. Once swallowed, the food travels down the esophagus. It doesn't just fall down. The lining of the canal has muscles that contract rhythmically to push the food forward in a process called peristaltic movement. The food then enters the stomach, which is a large, muscular organ. The stomach expands to hold the food and mixes it with gastric juices secreted by glands in its walls. These juices contain hydrochloric acid, which creates an acidic environment for the enzyme pepsin to begin digesting proteins. There is also mucus, which is incredibly important because it protects the inner lining of the stomach from being damaged by its own acid. From the stomach, the food enters the small intestine through a sphincter muscle. This is the longest part of the alimentary canal, though it's coiled up tightly to fit in our abdomen. Interestingly, the length of the small intestine varies depending on what an animal eats. Herbivores like cows have a longer small intestine to give them more time to digest tough cellulose, while carnivores like tigers have a shorter one because meat is easier to digest. The small intestine is where the complete digestion of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats takes place. To get the job done, the small intestine receives help from the liver and the pancreas. The liver secretes bile juice, which makes the acidic food from the stomach alkaline, so that pancreatic enzymes can work. Bile also contains salts that break down large fat globules into smaller ones, a process called emulsification, making it easier for enzymes to act on them. The pancreas contributes pancreatic juice, which contains trypsin for protein digestion and lipase for breaking down fats. Finally, enzymes in the intestinal juice finish the work, converting proteins into amino acids, complex carbohydrates into glucose, and fats into fatty acids and glycerol. Once the food is digested, it needs to be absorbed into the body. The inner lining of the small intestine is covered with millions of tiny, finger-like projections called villi. These villi massively increase the surface area for absorption and are packed with blood vessels that carry the nutrients to every cell in the body. Any food that isn't absorbed then moves into the large intestine where more water is pulled out. Finally, the remaining solid waste is removed from the body through the anus, a process regulated by the anal sphincter. Before we move on, we have to talk about dental health. Tooth decay, or dental caries, happens when bacteria in the mouth act on sugar to produce acids. These acids gradually dissolve the enamel on our teeth. If we don't brush, food particles and bacteria stick together to form a tough film called dental plaque. This plaque covers the teeth and prevents saliva, which can neutralize acid from reaching the surface. This is why brushing after eating is so important. It removes the plaque before the bacteria can produce enough acid to cause permanent damage. Now that we have nutrients in our cells, we need to release the energy stored in them. This is the goal of respiration. Whether an organism uses oxygen or not, the first step always happens in the cytoplasm, where 6-carbon glucose molecule is broken down into a 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. If oxygen is present, this is called aerobic respiration. The pyruvate enters the mitochondria, where it is completely broken down into carbon dioxide, water, and a very large amount of energy. Some organisms, like yeast, perform anaerobic respiration, which happens without oxygen. In this case, pyruvate is converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide, releasing much less energy. We actually experience a version of this in our own bodies. During sudden, intense physical activity, our muscle cells might run low on oxygen. To keep going, they break down pyruvate into lactic acid instead. This buildup of lactic acid is exactly what causes those painful muscle cramps we sometimes get after a sprint. The energy released during respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP or adenosine triphosphate. You can think of ATP as the energy currency of the cell. Whenever a cell needs to perform a task, like contracting a muscle, building a protein, or sending a nervous impulse, it spends an ATP molecule. Breaking the terminal phosphate bond of ATP using water releases exactly 30.5 kilojoules per mole of energy, which powers the cell's activities. To keep respiration going, organisms need to exchange gases with their environment. Plants do this through simple diffusion via their stomata and the spaces between cells. At night, when they aren't photosynthesizing, getting rid of carbon dioxide is their main activity. During the day, they use that carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, so oxygen release becomes the major event. Aquatic animals, like fish, have a harder job because the amount of dissolved oxygen in water is much lower than in the air. To compensate, fish breathe much faster, taking in water through their mouths and forcing it over their gills so the blood can pick up the oxygen. In humans, air enters through the nostrils, where it is filtered by fine hairs and mucus to keep out dust and germs. It then travels down the throat and through the windpipe. You might notice that your throat has rings of cartilage. These are there for protection, ensuring the air passage doesn't collapse even when there's no air in it. The passage then branches into smaller and smaller tubes inside the lungs, eventually ending in millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. The alveoli are amazing structures. They are balloon-like and provide a massive surface area, about 80 square meters, which is almost the size of a tennis court just for gas exchange. When we inhale, we lift our ribs and flatten our diaphragm, which expands our chest cavity. This creates a vacuum that sucks air into the lungs and fills the alveoli. The blood then drops off carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen. Our lungs always maintain a residual volume of air, meaning they never fully empty, which ensures there's always oxygen available to be absorbed. Because our bodies are so large, simple diffusion isn't enough to get oxygen to our toes. In fact, it would take 3 years for an oxygen molecule to diffuse that far. Instead, we have a respiratory pigment called hemoglobin in our red blood cells. Hemoglobin has a very high affinity for oxygen, grabbing it in the lungs and carrying it quickly to all our tissues. Carbon dioxide is more soluble in water than oxygen is, so it is mostly transported back to the lungs in its dissolved form in our blood plasma. We must also mention the dangers of smoking and tobacco. Tobacco use can damage the tongue, lungs, heart, and liver, and is a leading cause of oral cancer and heart attacks. Smoking specifically destroys the cilia, the tiny hair-like structures in our respiratory tract that sweep away dust and germs. When these are destroyed, smoke and infections can easily enter the lungs, leading to serious diseases like lung cancer. Protecting our respiratory system is vital for maintaining our life processes. Once the oxygen and nutrients are picked up, they need to be transported. In humans, this is the job of the blood. Blood is a fluid connective tissue made of a liquid called plasma and various cells. The plasma carries food, carbon dioxide, and nitrogenous wastes, while the red blood cells carry the oxygen. For this system to work, we need 3 things: a pump, a network of tubes, and a way to repair those tubes if they leak. Our pump is the heart, a muscular organ about the size of a fist. To prevent oxygen-rich blood from mixing with deoxygenated blood, the heart is divided into 4 chambers. The left side handles the oxygenated blood, receiving it from the lungs in the left atrium and pumping it out to the rest of the body from the left ventricle. The right side handles the oxygenated blood, receiving it from the body in the right atrium and pumping it to the lungs from the right ventricle. Because the ventricles have to pump blood much further than the atria, their muscular walls are much thicker. The heart also has valves to make sure the blood only flows in one direction. This separation of blood is very efficient. In birds and mammals, it helps maintain a constant body temperature. This is known as double circulation because the blood passes through the heart twice in one full trip around the body. Other animals have different setups. Amphibians and many reptiles have three-chambered hearts where some mixing occurs. Fish have the simplest system, a two-chambered heart where blood is pumped to the gills and then directly to the rest of the body, passing through the heart only once per cycle. As the heart pumps, the blood exerts a force against the walls of the vessels, which we call blood pressure. This pressure is much higher in the arteries than in the veins. We measure it using two numbers: the systolic pressure, which is the pressure when the heart contracts, normally around 120 millimeters of mercury, and the diastolic pressure when the heart is relaxed, normally around 80 millimeters of mercury. High blood pressure or hypertension is measured with an instrument called a sphygmomanometer and can be dangerous if left unchecked. The blood travels through different types of vessels. Arteries have thick, elastic walls because they carry blood away from the heart under high pressure. Veins have thinner walls and carry blood back to the heart. They don't need thick walls, but they do have valves to prevent blood from flowing backward. Between these are the capillaries, the smallest vessels, which are only one cell thick. This thinness allows for the exchange of materials between the blood and our cells. If a vessel gets damaged, tiny cell fragments called platelets circulate in the blood to plug the leak by forming a clot. There is also another transport fluid called lymph. Some plasma, proteins, and blood cells escape through the pores of the capillaries into the spaces between cells. This fluid is collected into lymphatic capillaries and eventually drained back into the large veins. Lymph is colorless and contains less protein than blood. It plays a key role in carrying digested fats from the intestine and draining excess fluid back into the bloodstream. Plants also need to move materials, but their needs are different because they don't move and have many dead cells in their tissues. This allows them to use slower transport systems. They use two specialized tissues: xylem, which moves water and minerals from the roots upward to the leaves, and phloem, which moves the products of photosynthesis, a process called translocation, from the leaves to the rest of the plant. So, how does a tall tree get water to its top leaves without a pump? It uses two main forces. First, there is root pressure. Roots actively take up ions from the soil, creating a concentration difference that naturally pulls water in. Second, and even more powerful during the day, is transpiration pull. As water evaporates from the stomata in the leaves, a process called transpiration, it creates a suction effect that pulls a continuous column of water all the way up from the roots. Transpiration also helps the plant stay cool in the sun. Moving food through the phloem is a bit different. Unlike the xylem, translocation in the phloem requires energy in the form of ATP. The plant uses energy to load sucrose into the phloem tissue. This increases the osmotic pressure, which causes water to move in and pushes the food toward tissues with lower pressure. This system allows the plant to move nutrients wherever they are needed whether it's up to growing buds or down to storage organs like roots and fruits. The final life process we need to discuss is excretion. As our cells perform chemical reactions, they produce nitrogenous wastes like urea and uric acid, which are harmful and must be removed. Single-celled organisms can simply diffuse these wastes out through their body surface into the surrounding water. However, complex multicellular organisms like humans have developed a specialized excretory system to handle this task. The human excretory system consists of a pair of kidneys located in the abdomen, two tubes called ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. The kidneys filter the blood to remove nitrogenous waste. This waste, now called urine, travels down the ureters to the bladder, where it is stored. The bladder is muscular and under the control of our nervous system, allowing us to release the urine through the urethra when we are ready. Inside each kidney, the actual work is done by millions of tiny filtration units called nephrons. Each nephron has a cluster of thin-walled capillaries associated with a cup-shaped structure called Bowman's capsule. As blood passes through, an initial filtrate is collected. This filtrate contains not just waste, but also useful things like glucose, amino acids, and salts. As the filtrate flows through the long tube of the nephron, these useful substances and most of the water are selectively reabsorbed back into the blood. To give you an idea of the scale, our kidneys produce about 180 liters of filtrate every day, but we only actually excrete about 1 or 2 liters as urine. In cases of kidney failure, technology can help. An artificial kidney, or hemodialysis, is a device that uses semi-permeable tubes suspended in a special fluid to remove nitrogenous wastes from a patient's blood through diffusion. It works similarly to a natural kidney, but with one major difference. There is no selective reabsorption, so the process must be carefully monitored. Plants also have to deal with waste, but they do it quite differently. Oxygen itself is a waste product of photosynthesis, and they release it through their stomata. They get rid of excess water through transpiration. For other wastes, plants often store them in cellular vacuoles, in leaves that eventually fall off, or as resins and gums in old, non-functional xylem. Some plants even excrete waste substances directly into the soil around their roots. Before we conclude, let's think about a very important topic: organ donation. Donating organs like kidneys, hearts, or corneas is a noble act that can save or transform the lives of others. Anyone can be a donor, regardless of age. While most donations happen after death, living donors can also safely donate one kidney or a part of their liver. It's a powerful way to ensure that even after life, we can help others maintain their own life processes. To wrap things up, let's summarize what we've learned today. We've seen that life processes like nutrition, respiration, transportation, and excretion are all essential for maintaining the organized structure of living beings. We've explored how autotrophs make their own food using the sun's energy, while heterotrophs must consume and break down complex substances. We've learned that respiration provides the ATP needed for cellular work, and that our heart and blood vessels form a complex delivery system to move oxygen and nutrients. Finally, we looked at how nephrons in our kidneys filter out waste to keep our internal environment clean. As you review this chapter, make sure you can explain the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration and why double circulation is so important for mammals. Compare the roles of the alveoli in the lungs with the nephrons in the kidneys. Both are specialized for exchange and filtration. Understand the different roles of xylem and phloem in plants. And remember why protecting your body from substances like tobacco is so critical for keeping all these amazing processes running smoothly. Thank you for joining this session. If you feel the video helped you in understanding the chapter better, please subscribe to the channel and share the channel link with your classmates. Take care and see you in the next video.